What happens when one of Hollywood's most intense and enigmatic actors sits across from one of television's most outspoken and unapologetic hosts, and refuses to bend under relentless questioning? That was the question hanging in the air when Tom Hardy appeared on The View for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview. Instead, viewers witnessed a tense, uncomfortable, and ultimately explosive confrontation that no one in the studio, or watching at home, was prepared for. From the moment the cameras rolled, the atmosphere inside the View studio felt different. There was a subtle unease, a barely perceptible tension that seasoned television professionals instinctively recognize. Tom Hardy walked onto the set with his trademark quiet intensity, dressed simply in a black jacket and dark jeans. There were no flashy accessories, no exaggerated smiles, just that unmistakable presence that had made him one of Hollywood's most compelling actors. His piercing eyes scanned the panel briefly before he took his seat, acknowledging the audience with a polite nod as applause filled the studio. Fans in the crowd were visibly excited. Hardy had built a reputation for disappearing into complex roles in films like Mad Max, Fury Road, Venom, The Dark Knight Rises, and Legend. He wasn't known for controversy on daytime television, which made his appearance feel special, almost rare. Whoopi Goldberg, ever the seasoned moderator, welcomed him warmly, thanking him for joining the show and praising his latest project. "So excited to have you here, Tom," Whoopi said with her signature smile. "You've got a new film coming out, and our audience is dying to hear about it." Hardy responded politely, his voice carrying that deep, gravelly tone fans recognized instantly. "Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's been quite a journey bringing this character to life." At first, everything seemed on track. The interview appeared to be following the familiar rhythm of daytime talk shows: light banter, film promotion, anecdotes from set. But then Joy Behar leaned forward in her chair, her expression shifting just enough to signal that she had something else on her mind. "Tom," she said, cutting in before the conversation could settle, "before we get into all that movie stuff, I have to ask, you've made some pretty interesting political comments in the past." The studio seemed to go quiet. As someone with such a massive platform, Joy continued, "Don't you think celebrities should be more careful about influencing their fans?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Hardy didn't react immediately. His expression remained controlled, but there was a subtle change in his posture, a tightening of his shoulders, a slight narrowing of his eyes. It was clear he understood exactly where this line of questioning was heading. "I think people are intelligent enough to form their own opinions," Hardy replied calmly. "I don't presume to tell anyone how to think or vote. I share my perspective when asked, nothing more." For a brief moment, it seemed like that might be the end of it. But Joy Behar wasn't satisfied. "But come on, Tom," she pressed. "You have millions of followers. When you post something or make a statement, it carries weight. Don't you feel a responsibility for that influence?" Hardy paused, then leaned slightly forward in his chair. "Responsibility to who, exactly?" he asked, his tone still measured but noticeably sharper. "To you, to the media, or to the people who choose, of their own free will, to follow what I do?" The shift in energy was undeniable. One of the other co-hosts attempted to jump in, redirecting the conversation toward Hardy's intense preparation methods for roles, his physical transformations, his immersive acting style. But Joy wasn't ready to let it go. "I'm just saying," she continued, "in today's climate, with everything happening politically and socially, maybe it would be better if entertainers just stuck to entertaining." That was the moment everything changed. Hardy went quiet, not the awkward kind of silence, but the deliberate, focused kind that commands attention. He studied Joy Behar's face for several seconds, his intense gaze unbroken. It was the same look audiences had seen on screen right before one of his characters delivered a devastating line or made a decisive move. With respect, Hardy finally said, his voice calm but firm, "That's not for you to decide." The studio froze. "I'm an entertainer, yes," he continued, "but I'm also a citizen, a father, and a human being. Acting doesn't erase my right to have opinions, and it doesn't turn audiences into mindless followers. People can enjoy my work without agreeing with me on everything." Joy tried to interject, but Hardy kept going, still controlled, never raising his voice, which somehow made his words even more powerful. "If we start telling artists to stay silent because their thoughts make people uncomfortable," he said, "then we're not protecting society, we're limiting it." The panel sat stunned. Whoopi Goldberg looked down at the table briefly, clearly sensing how far the conversation had drifted from its intended path. The audience was silent now, hanging on every word. Joy Behar leaned back in her chair, visibly irritated. "Well, I disagree," she said sharply, "and I think that kind of thinking is part of the problem." Hardy exhaled slowly. "You're entitled to that opinion," he replied. "Just like I'm entitled to mine." What happened next would spark days of speculation, heated online debate, and viral clips across social media. As the segment went to commercial, tension exploded behind the scenes. Raised voices were reportedly heard off camera, and moments later, one of the hosts stormed off the set, never to return. What was meant to be a simple promotional appearance had turned into one of The View's most talked about moments. And for viewers at home, one thing was certain. This wasn't just an interview, it was a clash of ideologies, egos, and unfiltered truths that nobody would forget anytime soon. When Tom Hardy finally spoke, his voice was low and measured, but it carried an unmistakable authority that instantly cut through the tension in the room. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Every word landed with precision. "That's interesting advice," Hardy said slowly, his eyes never leaving Joy Behar, coming from someone who built an entire career on sharing her political opinions on national television. A collective breath seemed to leave the studio at once. "Tell me something, Joy," he continued, his tone calm but razor sharp. "When exactly did you decide that your thoughts were more valuable than mine?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the audience, normally eager to react, laugh, or applaud, remained completely still. It was the kind of silence that only happens when everyone present realizes they're witnessing something unscripted and irreversible. This was no longer a talk show exchange. This was a direct confrontation. Joy Behar's face flushed slightly, a mix of irritation and surprise crossing her expression. She hadn't expected Hardy to push back so openly, let alone with such pointed clarity. "That's different," she shot back, her voice rising just enough to betray her frustration. "This is a talk show. It's literally my job to have opinions and share them." Hardy didn't hesitate. "You're an actor," he replied evenly, "and you're a comedian." Joy opened her mouth to interrupt, but Hardy continued without missing a beat. "Or at least," he added, "that's what you used to be before you decided you were qualified to lecture the world on politics." A ripple of discomfort spread across the panel. "At what point," Hardy asked calmly, "did telling jokes make you an expert on everything else?" The words landed hard. Sarah Haynes shifted in her chair, glancing between Hardy and Behar, clearly unsure whether she should step in or stay silent. Alyssa Farah Griffin leaned back slightly, her posture tense, sensing that the exchange had moved far beyond typical television sparring. Whoopi Goldberg stared down at the table, her expression unreadable, perhaps calculating how, or if, she could regain control of the segment. Joy's eyes narrowed. "I've been in this business for decades, Tom," she snapped. "I've interviewed presidents, world leaders. I've earned my voice." Hardy nodded slowly, as if acknowledging her point, then responded, "And I respect experience," he said. "But experience doesn't grant moral authority. It doesn't mean your opinions carry more weight just because you've been saying them longer, or louder." The audience remained silent, hanging on every word. "You asked whether entertainers should stick to entertaining," Hardy continued, "but you're an entertainer too. The difference is when I speak, I'm honest about what it is, my perspective. I don't disguise it as truth." Joy leaned forward now, visibly bristling. "So what, you think I'm misleading people?" she challenged. "I think," Hardy replied carefully, "that telling people to stay silent while you speak freely is hypocrisy, and audiences are smarter than that." That was the moment the tension truly peaked. Joy's voice rose again. "This show exists to discuss issues that matter. If you don't like the questions, you don't have to be here." Hardy met her gaze without blinking. "I came here to talk about my work," he said, "and not to be told when I'm allowed to think." The studio felt frozen in time. Producers off, camera reportedly began signaling frantically, attempting to steer the conversation toward a commercial break. Whoopi finally looked up, clearly aware that the situation was slipping out of her hands. "Okay," Whoopi said cautiously, attempting to de-escalate. "Let's take a breath here." But Joy wasn't finished. "No," she interrupted. "I'm tired of celebrities pretending they're victims when they get questioned." Hardy exhaled slowly, the kind of controlled breath someone takes to avoid saying something irreversible. "Questioning isn't the issue," he said. "Dismissal is. You didn't ask me a question. You told me to stay in my lane." Joy stood abruptly. "And maybe you should," she snapped. That single movement, standing up, sent a jolt through the studio. Gasps echoed softly from the audience. Alyssa Farrah Griffin looked genuinely alarmed now, her hands clasped tightly together. Sarah Haynes leaned toward Whoopi, whispering something urgently. Hardy remained seated. "I will," he said calmly, when everyone else does too. Joy stared at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "This is unbelievable," she muttered, turning away from the table. What happened next stunned everyone. Joy Behar removed her microphone, placed it firmly on the table, and walked off the set without another word. The cameras cut to a wide shot. Whoopi sat motionless. The audience didn't know whether to clap or remain silent. Producers rushed in from off camera as the show abruptly cut to commercial. Tom Hardy sat quietly, hands folded, his expression unreadable. What was meant to be a routine daytime interview had erupted into one of the most shocking confrontations in the show's history. An unscripted clash of ideology, ego, and authority that left viewers stunned and the panel fractured. And once the footage hit the internet, the debate was only just beginning. "I think I've earned the right to ask tough questions," Joy said firmly, her chin lifting as she spoke. Tom Hardy didn't hesitate. His response came immediately, quiet, controlled, but edged with steel. "Asking tough questions and being qualified to answer them are two very different things," he said evenly. A murmur rippled through the audience before quickly dying out. The tension in the studio was now unmistakable, thick enough to feel. Hardy's gaze never wavered as he continued. "You can ask me anything you want," he added. "That's your right. But don't expect me to pretend that your opinions carry more weight than anyone else's just because you're holding a microphone." The cameras caught everything, every micro expression, every subtle shift in posture. Hardy leaned back slightly in his chair, completely composed, his hands resting calmly in his lap. In contrast, Joy leaned forward, her shoulders tense, irritation clearly etched across her face. She looked like someone unaccustomed to being challenged, especially on her own stage. "You know what, Tom?" Joy snapped. "I find it pretty arrogant that you think you can come on our show and lecture me about my job." Her voice grew sharper with every word. "We invited you here as a courtesy," she continued, "to promote your movie, not to be disrespected." For the first time since the exchange began, Hardy's eyebrows lifted slightly. A small smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. It wasn't warm, it wasn't playful, it was measured, and unmistakably pointed. "Disrespected," he repeated calmly. "I answered your question honestly." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "If you can't handle someone disagreeing with you," he went on, "maybe you're in the wrong line of work." A collective gasp rippled through the studio. "This is supposed to be a conversation, isn't it?" Hardy asked. "Or did I misunderstand the format?" Whoopi Goldberg shifted in her seat and leaned forward, clearly attempting to regain control of the segment. "Okay, let's maybe bring this back to—" "No, Whoopi," Joy interrupted abruptly, her agitation now impossible to hide. "I want to hear Tom explain why he thinks he can come on our show and act like this." The possessiveness in her tone didn't go unnoticed. Hardy tilted his head slightly, studying Joy with what appeared to be genuine curiosity rather than anger. "Act like what exactly?" he asked calmly. The question caught Joy off guard. "Like someone who has their own thoughts," Hardy continued. "Like someone who won't automatically agree with everything you say." He leaned forward just slightly now, not aggressively, but deliberately. "I'm trying to understand what behavior you find so objectionable," he said, "because from where I'm sitting, all I've done is answer your questions without pretending." Joy scoffed. "You're being deliberately provocative," she said. "You're coming in here with an attitude." Hardy shook his head slowly. "No," he replied. "I'm coming in here without submission. There's a difference." The audience was dead silent now. Even the producers off camera could be seen waving discreetly, signaling for a break that never came. You asked whether entertainers should stick to entertaining, Hardy continued, but when I speak honestly, I'm told I'm being disrespectful. That's not a discussion, that's control. Joy's lips pressed into a thin line. So now, you're accusing me of silencing you? She said incredulously. I'm pointing out a contradiction. Hardy replied, you want the freedom to question, but not the discomfort of being questioned back. Sarah Haynes shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Alyssa Farrah Griffin, who now sat rigid, her hands clasped tightly. The entire panel felt like it was walking on a live wire. Joy threw up her hands. This is unbelievable, she said. You come on this show, challenge me, undermine what I do, Hardy interrupted gently but firmly. I haven't undermined you, he said. I've disagreed with you. If disagreement feels like disrespect, that says more about the environment than the guest. The weight of that statement settled heavily over the studio. Whoopi inhaled deeply, clearly choosing her next words carefully. Let's take a breath here, she said. Everyone's passionate, but Joy turned toward her sharply. No, I'm tired of this, she said. I'm tired of men coming on this show and acting like they're above accountability. Hardy didn't raise his voice. Accountability isn't obedience, he said quietly. That was the breaking point. Joy pushed her chair back slightly, the scrape echoing through the studio microphones. She stared at Hardy, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. You know what? She said coldly. If this is how you want to behave, maybe you shouldn't be here. Hardy met her stare, unflinching. Maybe, he said calmly. This is exactly where conversations like this need to happen. The room felt frozen. No laughter, no applause, no cue cards could save this moment. Joy shook her head slowly, reached up and removed her microphone. I'm done, she muttered. She placed the mic on the table and stood, walking off the set as the cameras scrambled to adjust. Whoopi remained seated, stunned. The audience didn't know whether to clap or stay silent. Hardy sat back once more, composed, his expression unreadable. What had started as a routine, promotional appearance had transformed into a raw, unscripted confrontation. One that exposed not just clashing opinions, but clashing ideas about power, authority, and who gets to speak. And as the show cut abruptly to commercial, one thing was clear. This wasn't just another tense moment on daytime television. It was a moment people would be talking about for a long time. Tom, you came on our show, Joy said sharply, her voice tight with frustration, which means you agreed to our format. We ask the questions, you answer them. We don't need you turning this into some kind of philosophical debate. For the first time in several minutes, Hardy leaned forward. His movement was subtle, but deliberate. His voice remained steady, calm, but sharpened. Your format, he replied evenly, seems to be asking loaded questions and then getting upset when someone doesn't give you the answer you want to hear. He paused just long enough for the words to sink in. Is that really the best you can do? He added after all these years in television. The studio went completely silent. The audience didn't shift, no one coughed. Even the cameramen appeared frozen, uncertain whether they should keep rolling or cut away from what was rapidly becoming one of the most uncomfortable confrontations daytime television had ever seen. I don't have to sit here and take this, Joy snapped, her voice rising noticeably, from some actor who thinks he's smarter than everyone else. She leaned forward now, eyes blazing. You want to play games, she said. Fine, let's talk about your past, Tom. Let's talk about some of the things you've done that maybe your fans don't know about. For the first time, Hardy's expression changed, not to fear, not to concern. Something colder, something harder. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter than before. So quiet it forced everyone to lean in. Somehow, that restraint made his words feel more dangerous. Go ahead, Joy, he said softly. Let's see what you think you know. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to sink into her chair. Whoopi Goldberg's face tightened as she scanned the table, clearly trying to figure out how to stop what was happening without pouring gasoline on the fire. Sunny Hostin opened her mouth, then closed it again, but Joy, driven now by wounded pride and anger, pushed forward. You've had your share of legal troubles, haven't you? She said. Arrests, run-ins with the law. Maybe before you lecture me about responsibility, you should look in the mirror. The room felt like it dropped 10 degrees. Hardy didn't respond immediately. He sat perfectly still, studying Joy with an intensity that made several people in the studio visibly uncomfortable. Seconds stretched. The silence felt endless. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but there was ice beneath it. "You're absolutely right, Joy," he said. "I've made mistakes in my past." The audience stirred slightly. "I've been arrested," Hardy continued. "I've struggled with addiction. I've done things I'm not proud of." Joy's lips curled slightly, as if she believed she'd landed her point. "But," Hardy said, his voice firming, "the difference is, I've acknowledged those mistakes. I've owned them. I've learned from them. And I've worked every day to become a better person." He looked directly at her. "Can you say the same?" Joy recoiled slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" she demanded. "It means," Hardy replied evenly, "I've never hidden behind a television show to attack people who can't fight back." Gasps rippled through the audience. "I've never used my platform to spread gossip and destruction while pretending to be morally superior," he continued. "When I hurt people, it was usually myself." Joy's face flushed bright red. "How dare you compare? How dare I?" Hardy cut in, his composure finally cracking just enough to reveal genuine anger. "What, tell the truth?" The room froze. "You want to bring up my past," he continued, his voice no longer quiet, but controlled and cutting. "Fine, then let's talk about your present." Joy stared at him, stunned. "How many careers have you damaged with your loose tongue?" Hardy asked. "How many people have you hurt with your need to always be right, always be the center of attention?" Sonny Hostin finally tried to intervene. "I think maybe we should take a commercial break." "No," Hardy said firmly, never taking his eyes off Joy. The single word stopped everything. "She wanted to have this conversation," he said. "Let's have it." Joy looked like she might explode. "You've spent decades on television," Hardy continued, tearing people down under the guise of tough questions. "But the truth is, real accountability starts with looking inward, not pointing fingers outward." Joy slammed her hand on the table. "This is outrageous," she said. "You don't get to come on this show and judge me." Hardy leaned back slightly, his voice steady again. "I didn't come here to judge you," he said. "You invited judgment the moment you decided disagreement equals disrespect." Whoopi finally spoke, her voice low and urgent. "Okay," she said. "This has gone far enough. But the damage was already done." The audience was completely silent now, aware they were witnessing something unscripted and irreversible. This wasn't a viral clip in the making. This was a breakdown of the unspoken rules that usually govern daytime television. Joy stood abruptly. "I'm done being lectured," she said. "I've earned my seat at this table." Hardy met her gaze. "So have I," he replied, "and I didn't earn it by pretending I was flawless." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Joy reached up, ripped off her microphone, and placed it on the table with a sharp snap. "This is unbelievable," she muttered. She turned and walked off the set. The cameras scrambled. Producers rushed in from off-screen. Whoopi sat frozen, stunned. Sarah stared straight ahead. Sonny exhaled sharply. Tom Hardy remained seated, silent, still. The studio cut abruptly to commercial, and in that moment one thing was certain. What was supposed to be a routine interview had become one of the most explosive, uncomfortable, and unforgettable moments in daytime television history.